That's our goal. Capture all that information that appears, as you know, right? I pointed out in the past that it all comes up here in the URL. So all we'll do is we'll track that in the cookie, and then that way, as we apply all these things and we come off to another page and come back again, we can just put that back in place, right? Okay, so we're halfway there, right? So here's my little copy paste file, and we'll come back to the grid system later. All right, so let me just follow along here. Uh, Basically, what we're going to do, we've already seen how we can use cookies, so we're going to persist all that information in a cookie, right? As I say, what we're saving is basically the URL, okay? So guess what? I need another little utility, okay? So I'm going to add another class to my utilities folder. Boy, we're getting more and more of them here, aren't we? But they sure can help us by saving us with a lot of work that they can do, right? So I'm going to call this one maintain URL because that's really what it's all about, right? So I'll just get my code and hopefully I'm not missing any curly braces this time. Don't have any build errors. Okay, I don't see it complaining about anything, so I'm probably okay. All right, so here we are. Summary, maintain the URL for an index view, including the filter, sort, and page information, right? Now notice we depend on the cookie helper utility. So you have to have that utility there as well, right? Works with our default route, okay? That's just something to be aware of, that I'm basing all this assuming that we haven't changed our default route from what is shown down here, that we reference the name of the controller, followed by the action, and then optionally slash an ID number, right? I've never actually changed it from the default route yet, but if you ever did, right, then you might have to make some adjustments here because we're basing it on that. Okay, parameters, the context, the controller name. Hey, thank goodness our cognizant controllers now know their own name, so it's easy to pass that information, right? And there we go. It returns uh, the index URL, okay, with the parameters if required, right? So that's what we're going to get here. So basically, we have those two things, the name of the controller and so on. So I'm remember when we save the cookie, okay, I'm going to use a certain unique name. I'm going to use the controller name with URL tacked on the end, right? That'll be the value for the key value, sorry, the key for the key value pair. Bite my tongue, the key, right? Now, search text here, this is what I'm going to search for to see the end of the actual URL before the query string parameters, right? It ends with the slash controller name and a question mark. And after the question mark, then we get all the name value pairs for the query string parameters, right? Okay. So I just go to my request.headers, the referrer. Well, that's the URL of the page that brought me here. And that contains, right, all of those parameters. So I toString it, okay, and that is initially my return URL. I check, does it contain the search text here? Okay, if it does, all right, then I know I'm on the right track. So I basically, by using last index of the search text, I strip out everything, okay, and just save the query string parameters, right? That's my return URL. And then I set that in the cookie here with my context, the cookie name, and away we go. And once again, 30 minutes, I figure is long enough. All right, now the else branch, okay, we're going to get it from the cookie, right? So we go in our request.cookies, we have the cookie name, so we go and we get it. Now, of course, it might not be there, right? So if it's null, then I'm just going to return slash controller name because we know with our default route, that'll just by default take us to the default action, which is the index action. There we go. So this should be able to handle the job that we need it to do, giving us the full path with all those parameters, right? Or just the controller name itself. So we can just go back to the index if we don't have any parameters to worry about. All right, so that's our one utility. Now, now the next thing to do is to get the controller to work with that. So there's two approaches, the bad approach and the good approach. Okay. You know, the first thing, yeah, and this is just an approach I worked out first when I was first figuring out how to try and do something like this. I went to the controller. I added a method called return view data, sorry, view data return URL, right? So we just would call that maintain URL, get the proper link, and store that in view data so we could use it there, right? And then, okay, we could add this code to the index action, clear the cookie, right? And then in 7 more places throughout the controller, right? The details and both the get and post for create, edit, and delete, go in and add this code to make sure we're adding that information into the view data, right? That's an awful lot of customization, a lot of little spots to go and find the right spot in code and paste it in and so on. So ignore all that. We're going to follow our better approach, right? We're going to add another class to custom controllers that can do the work for us. So we just inherit from it and we're done, right? Now, as I said here, first of all, we're going to add a bit more to the original cognizant controller because we're going to find it's very useful if our controller not only knows, right? This is what we had there already, basically, right? These two internal strings. So we can ask inside controller code, what's the name of the controller and what's the name of the action? But that doesn't tell anything to the view, right? So we're going to add a bit of code in our cognizant controller to also give it the ability to tuck that information away in the view data being returned to the view so we can access it from there as well, right? So when we come up to my custom controllers, I'm going to edit the cognizant controller first just by basically adding this additional information, right? You know what? I'm going to get in trouble if I don't just replace the whole thing. So I'm going to do that, even though I'm really just adding a bit of code. Okay, so this was here already, right down to here. So I'm adding these new methods. I'm overriding on action executing and then the asynchronous version as well, right? So basically, executed before any action method is called gives us a chance to add to the view data dictionary, right? So it's a great way for us to make these values available to all the views. So basically, that's all I'm doing is I'm adding the controller name, the action name. Now this I'm putting in. If you look at any of our views, like well, even the index view, but for example, I'll just bring up details. You've noticed that this is at the top, right? What has that been doing for us all along? It's providing in view data a key value pair title details. Well, that gets used way down here on our layout, right? When it adds the title to the actual HTML page that is the container for our view, right? Our layout page, it uses that view data to help put that up in the tab at the top, right? So we can provide it this way in here, or what I'm going to do inside the cognizant controller is I'll give it here, right? And that way I can make it so it actually says controller name, action name. So, you know, patient's index, for example, right? And that I think is it's a little more clear. And the beauty of it is I don't have to go and customize it on all of the pages, right? It'll just be inherited basically coming from the view data from here. Now, mind you, if you do want to ever change it from that, we'll eventually take this out, right? Because this would actually replace, this will take precedence over what's coming from that cognizant controller. And we would end up just getting details. We wouldn't get the controller name details, right? But we'll end up taking this out, but you can always put it back in if you want to. So we have the controller name, action. For our convenience, this more explanatory title. And later on, we're going to be adding the return URL. But I'm putting this bit of code in here. I'm making sure if our view data contains the return URL, then we don't want to change it, right? But if it doesn't contain it, then I'm going to set it to just the / controller name, right? But later on, we're going to add a second controller class to inherit from this one that will use the actual query string parameters. Okay, and that's just the same thing repeated here for the asynchronous version of the on action execution, right? Okay, so the only thing we've really added here is that in these, because this doesn't write anything into the view data, so down here we actually have an event we can grab onto and add this useful information so that the views can start making use of it as well. All right, so that's the first step. Now that we have our cognizant controller, it is even smarter than it was. Even smarter. Wow, how does that happen, eh? Now we're going to add yet another custom controller. I'm going to add a controller here. Okay, and it is going to, well, I could have said class. That's probably a better thing for me to do. Add class, sorry. Right, and this is going to be, I tried to think of a name for a controller that has a memory, right? Because this is going to remember all those parameter values for us for sort filter paging. So I thought of the animal that I know of that makes me think about having a good memory is an elephant. So here is our elephant controller. Sorry, that's just my weird sense of humor coming into play here. Forgive me if I offend anybody with this, any elephant, fans that take offense. I'm sorry. Hope you don't mind too much, right? My elephant controller has a good memory to help persist the index, fil sort, filter, and paging parameters, right, into a URL. Note, there's a warning here. We're depending not only on cookie helper, we're depending on that maintain URL utility as well, right? And notice this, we can just inherit again from cognizant controller, which we know inherits from controller. So here we are, true object-oriented design, right? We're inheriting and inheriting and inheriting here, right? So what's going on here? So first of all, I have a list, an array of strings, this list of actions with URL, I'm calling it, right? So these are the actions that I want to be able to latch onto and then add our return URL. Now you'll see some familiar names here, details, create, edit, delete, right? We don't have to worry about index, so to speak, because that stands on its own, right? But these are all the actions that we come to from the index. Ooh, where did that add, update, and remove come from? Well, looking further down the course, I'm going to be teaching you an approach that sometimes we use a controller in a different way than the normal approach, right? A controller might be set up to always work specifically with an object in relation, like usually a child to some other object, right? So as a good practice, what I usually emphasize is that to remind us when we're working in one of these special purpose controllers, that instead of, just leaving the default names as create, edit, and delete, I'll usually change those actions to add, update, and remove, right? That way, just when I'm working in that controller, it's a constant reminder to me that, hey, this is not the normal situation. But to accommodate that naming approach, I'm going to add those as possible names here because they're really just pseudonyms, you might say, for create, edit, and delete, right? That might come into play. It doesn't hurt if we never use it, but they're there because we probably will. All right. So notice that I can also override those same actions, the on action executing, right? Same ones that we already did in the cognizant controller, but that's okay. Okay, it works along with it, right? So here, basically, if it's any one of these actions, okay, in other words, basically anything but index, right? Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add that one line of code, putting my return URL into the view data. Now on the index action, remember said what we have to do there, we want to always make sure when we come back to the index that we clear the cookie, right? So that is what this does. We're using our cookie helper cookie set. A negative expiration is basically the same as deleting the cookie, right? So that just clears the cookie out, and we want to do that whenever we come back to the index. And that's basically all there is in there. It's the same thing here in the asynchronous version, right? So that way I don't have to go into each controller that I want to do this and add, this code in 8 different spots and forget one and you'll mess up and accidentally put in the wrong spot and you can mess up and so on. So this really helps us avoid a lot of those human errors that come when you have to do a lot of customization. Okay. All right, so I'm going to just save everything so far. I'm going to right click, close all these tabs. Then the next thing to do is on the views, right? We're going to replace the back to list link, right? So if I'm going to come down here, I don't have to worry about the index views. You know what? I'm going to do it on all these. I'm going to open up each and every one of these, right? For doctors, appointments, details, edit, okay? Patient, get all these open. Look at all those are open. Every one of these at the moment has this same link, right? Action, back to list, okay? It's one of my pet peeves about the templated views is they don't identify themselves. Wouldn't it be nice if if you're going to go back to the list of patients, it said back to patient list, that type of thing, right? Well, you could manually go in and change them, but this is a nice way to get all that done, okay, easily, right? So as I say in the copy paste file, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my return URL, right? And then the fact that in view data, we added the controller name. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to replace all of those links with this one. I can easily do that in Visual Studio because I have all these documents open. If I highlight that, go Control H for find and replace, Okay, I'm going to replace it with this new link, and I can select all open documents. So just the views that I have open, I'm going to go around and replace them all, right? So I'll click replace all, and bada bing, okay, 12 replaced. Now, just a caution, to use this, of course, actually my controller has to at least be the cognizant controller, if not the elephant controller, right? So that's probably the next thing I should go and do. I can close all these. I can just save them all, close all these tabs. Let me go and get my 3 controllers, appointments, doctors, and patients, right? So appointments has nothing on it. There's no actual sorting, filtering, or paging. So, really just giving it the cognizant controller is enough because it adds the view data that I need to make that work. For doctors and patients, I'm going to want to go right to having the elephant controller, right? Because they have at least one of the 3, if not all 3. Elephant controller gives us everything, right? And there we go. So now all my controllers are set. All those links are set. They will always go back with any values that we need to persist for those URL parameters, right? And that's it for the views. Okay. Now, um, there's one more spot that we have to worry about. There's other places where we end up going back to the index view, and that's within the controllers themselves, right? Remember that every time, and maybe I'll just shrink down here, Control MO in each of these, just because there's so much code, and we can focus on where we have to here. Control MO shrinks it all down, right? In each controller, actually, I don't have to worry about appointments, so I'm going to close that one. I'm done there. So for patients and doctors, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down each of the spots where we save changes. So that's in the post events for all 3 of our actions, right? So the create post event, the edit post event, and the delete confirmed, which is the delete post event, right? Each one of these, after we save changes, look what we do. Hard-coded redirect to action name of index, okay? So if we do that, if we successfully do a delete, an edit, or a create, and go back to the index, once again, this doesn't return our full URL with all those query string parameters. So simple. All we have to do is we have it in view data. So I've replaced this line with this, okay? Redirect, using that, return URL, just two-stringing it, and the redirect will basically say, follow this link, right? And that's perfect for the delete, okay? And I could put that effectively for the edit and the create as well, and that would always take me back to the index, preserving all my parameters. But let me mention here, but, common practice is to redirect to details after you save changes from a create or an edit, right? Never mentioned that before, but think about it for a second. If you, okay, have made a change, an edit, for example, right? If you just go back to the index after you're finished, we've already seen that often we have way too much, too many properties, right, to actually fit onto an index. So we often prioritize and pick, sometimes even 2 or 3 of the most important ones to show on the index. And if you want to see all the details about a given entity, you click the details link, and that is where you show all the information, right? So it's a good practice in many cases that after doing a create or an edit, right, instead of going back to the index, think you edited and you changed a property that doesn't show on the index. When you go back to the index, it's not really, did I actually successfully change that? I don't know, right? I don't see it there. It's not on the screen. So a good common practice is to instead, after you successfully create or edit, redirect to the details. That way, all the details for the entity that was just created or just edited are on the screen. And it's reassuring to the user to actually see that, right? So we could just go back using this line like I just did in the delete. We could use it for all of them, but it's good practice to actually go to details instead. So that's what I'm going to do in these 2 controllers. So I'm going to come to the edit post, right? Right down here in the try catch. So after we save changes, we're going to go to, oh, I copied the wrong one. Wouldn't you know it? Okay. We're going to go here. We're going to redirect to an action. What action? Details. And we can pass the parameter because, of course, details looks for, it's a nullable int, but it looks for the ID of the patient, right, to bring up the patient details. So, of course, it's patient to edit in here, right? Now, same thing coming up to the post for create. Exact same line of code, okay, after save changes. The only difference is, of course, the object isn't patient update, it's just patient, right? Okay, now I've covered all my links on all the views. We'll use my return URL, okay? The ones that I want to in here after delete will, but even after I come to details, fortunately, because it will have the proper return URL, it's going to work out. So finally, the same three changes here in doctors, right? So in the post for create, except of course it's doctor. The post for edit, instead of after save changes, instead of this redirect, and it's doctor to update. Yeah, I'm sorry, you have to eventually do some customized work right here and there. Now this one it would be exactly the same. I don't have to customize it. It's the exact same code that I put in the delete confirmed for the patient because it has no mention of the entity. It just uses the return URL. All right, so that's it. So let me just run and we'll actually see if this actually works. So just note that if you don't want to go to details after create or edit, then just use that same line that we just put in there. So if I come to patients, okay, so I'll apply a filter here for the letter, I don't know, T, right? We'll set a sort order. I'll go a few pages on, and then I'm going to pick on somebody. So Tyler Watts, we're going to edit Tyler Watts. I'm going to make a change here. The middle name starts with a Z. If I click save, now I should go to details where I can see that it's successfully saved it, but look at that. My link takes me back to the index and I'm right where I left off. There's Tyler's record. Okay, I'm on page 4, right? I have the same filter being applied here. I have the same sort order. Success. We've got it saved. I can go to doctors. I only have paging here, right? But even if I go to details or something, back again, I'm on the same page that I left. Perfect. I'm getting exactly the functionality I want. Now, appointments, we don't have any of that. Don't even have paging, right? But still, if I were to come to details, right? See, actually, I do have my back to the appointments list. So at least it's giving me the URL properly, and it's using the nice customized name here, back to the appointments list, right? As opposed to just back to list, right? So at the minimum, I got at least that much out of doing so. Okay, back to appointments list. All right. So that basically wraps up this demonstration. Any questions about that? I know I have a little bit of code left, but I'm going to stop and start the recording before I get into that.